Welcome back. Now, President Cyril Ramaphosa has issued a strong call on Israel to release the South Africans on board the Global Sumud Flotilla and other nationals who were abducted last night and the early hours of this morning. The humanitarian vessels bound for Gaza were seized in international waters, a move the president says violates international law and deepens the suffering of Palestinians. Now, many people last night, early hours of the morning, were of course keeping an eye on proceedings through the Global Sumud Flotilla's live YouTube stream. Now, the question we ask ourselves is, what are the legal mechanisms that will be offered to those who have been abducted? And many of them now, of course, are being detained in Ashdod. Joining me now, I'd like to welcome no stranger to us here at Hilaal TV, a member of the legal support team for the Global Sumud Flotilla, Joe Bluen. Joe Bluen, assalamu alaikum. Always good having you on. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me with you. It's always great to be on Hilaal. Assalamu alaikum, and greetings to your viewers at home.
Wa alaikum salam. No, always good having you on, Joe. Joe, I know you were following proceedings late last night, early this morning. They got far, unlike many other of the flotillas before. But I guess we had to anticipate that the Israeli Navy, the Israeli forces were going to intercept these vessels.
I think that's, as we spoke the last time, when you have someone like Itamar Ben-Gvir referring to the humanitarian activists as terrorists, when you have seen an escalating, belligerent policy of propaganda by the Israeli Defense Forces and various branches of the Israeli government, it becomes very apparent that this kind of large Zionist entity is desperately threatened by humanitarian activists, and was increasingly making it clear, whether it was by carrying out illegal and genocidal drone attacks on two vessels in Tunisian waters, whether it was by the attacks and surveillance throughout the journey, including a particularly difficult night a few nights ago. And now we have seen interception and illegal abduction, effectively hostage taking of civilian maritime humanitarian activists who are traveling to break an illegal siege. So yes, it was inevitable. Unfortunately, we are living in a world that is so upside down that an entity with the support of the genocidal West is carrying out an annihilatory extermination campaign and still has the audacity to break international law and assume it has the power to dictate how and when aid is allowed to enter into a besieged territory that it currently acts as a settler colonial occupying force of.
Joe, I want to read the statement from Adala, and of course they are the legal representatives right now, and I'm sure you've been in contact with them as somebody who, of course, has a great legal analysis and understanding of the situation. And for those who maybe do not understand what I'm about to read now, you'd be able to break this down. What we saw last night constitutes a grave violation of due process and a denial of the participants' fundamental rights. Break that down for us, because violation, this is something that Israel does continuously, and it does so with this impunity. What were the protection, or what is the protection, I beg your pardon, Joe, for the passengers of these vessels?
So I think that's a really important point. I think there's two branches of law, at least. I think in terms of Israeli domestic law and most domestic human rights frameworks, not that Israel has a particularly notable human rights framework, what we have got information, and as you read from the Adala report, there has been sparse communication with Adala Council, who are representing the delegates. As far as I am aware, they have not received full communication about when all of the abductees will be arriving in Ashdod. And so there's a complete violation of their rights of access to a council. But I think there's a broader question that has to do with their rights. So let us frame this for a second in the context of an Israel that is known, that is renowned for mass hostage taking, for the absolute unlawful detention of Palestinians. I was reading a report the other day in relation to this new bill that is going through Knesset that is horrendous, that will license Israeli prisons to execute Palestinians with more impunity than they already do. But we know, for example, that Israel keeps the bodies of political prisoners to serve out the terms as a corpse, to serve out their jail sentences. Now, this is the kind of criminal justice system with which you are dealing. And so it is an abject disregard for human rights law, for basic principles of prisoners' rights, for the rights to defense, that we are seeing in terms of how this is playing out, in terms of the communication with Adala. Over and above that, what I think is really crucial, and I just want to veer towards this, and it's something we can pick up later if it's of interest, is that, in terms of international law, we saw in the interception, it is just from psychological warfare, the use of water cannons, harassing, torturing these civilian volunteers for hours. We've seen this so I think let us be very clear about the violations, and I think that is the right word, of international law that this entails, right? International maritime law, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, has completely made clear that a blockade that is used simply to starve a civilian population is illegal. We know under the Rome Statute, Article 8, where war crimes are discussed, the impeding of humanitarian supplies and delivery amounts to a war crime. We know in the ICJ genocide case that one of the rulings in the 2024 March 2024 order was to provide unhindered access at scale to humanitarian aid. We know the Geneva Conventions and additional protocols have certain laws, antiquated that they may be, that occupying powers must have in relation to those they occupy. They shouldn't be occupying, but that laws exist. So this is a breach of, as you rightly point out, prisoners' rights, human rights on every level, and also multiple spheres of international law. This is altogether not only a barbaric blockade, not only a barbaric blockade that cannot be separated from the siege, from the genocide, and from the settler colony, but it is also a violation of almost every legal principle, treaty-based, customary international law, genocide convention, United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, San Remo Manual on lawfare and naval blockades, warfare and naval blockades. It is just a violation on every level.
Joe, we've got 2 minutes before we go to the break. Tiago Alvao, who of course was speaking on what they are aiming to deliver in Gaza. How important was he delivering the message in order to make sure that their rights are protected from an international law perspective when, of course, the Israeli army was going ahead and seizing these boats and, of course, taking these passengers as hostages?
It is such a crucial point. We remember with the Mavi Marmara that 10 activists were shot. We know also that this is one of the most globally diverse flotillas in history, and we know that there is an increased vulnerability of Muslim people, of racialized people, specifically of Black people, and that is a deep concern. The Israeli Defense Forces are a white supremacist regime, a racist regime, an Islamophobic regime, and an anti-Semitic and anti-Black regime. So it is vitally important that it is clarified that this mission acts within international law. I was at a conference shortly before the flotilla set sail. Every single international law expert, from the Gaza Tribunal to the Tunisian Bar Association to Francesca Albanese to academics, lawyers, people who have been involved in flotilla activities, has consensus that this is legal under international law.
After the break, my conversation continues with Joe Bluen. We're going to be discussing what now for those who are being held in Israeli detention facilities. If you heard the comments or read the comments, I beg your pardon, of Itamar Ben-Gvir, he wants to make life difficult for them. How do they get protected in that regards? My conversation with Joe Bluen continues after the break. Welcome back to News in Focus. I'm still in conversation with Joe Bluen. She's a member of the legal support team for the Global Sumud Flotilla. As always, Joe, thank you so much for staying with us. Joe, right, the hostages are currently in the Israeli prisons. They are obviously going to be represented by Adalah. It's going to be probably the most challenging case for the legal minds of Adalah. Talk to us through it. What is going to happen, especially when you're dealing in Israeli criminal justice system, which is probably not just the most difficult, but the most oppressive to try and deal with?
I think it's a really good and important question. Let me say, and for very important reasons, I'm not involved with the Adalah side of things because I'm working on the international law side of things, and we are looking at escalating this into including possible ICC action. So let me take the opportunity of not being part of Adalah to really say with my full chest how incredible their legal teams are. And in what tremendously good hands these brave volunteers are. So let me say that first of all. I can't go into too much detail around what happens next in precise terms for obvious reasons. But I think one of the things that is very, very important, and let me say two things here. When we last spoke, it was a very clarifying conversation. And we said that states can recognize that this is a likely outcome, and states can act. States, international organizations, ordinary human beings, media spaces can act to escalate the pressure, to say to Israel, because impunity is a structure.
Yeah.
And I think this is important. And how we break down that structure is we starve the empire. And so the kind of things that need to be happening now to really start thinking about what kind of protection we are obligated to provide and what kind of solidarity we are obligated to provide. We need to start thinking about states issuing statements, putting increasing, escalating by the minute pressure on the Israeli regime to release these abductees that they have kidnapped. I think the international law argument is very important, and we have discussed that. I think that Israel is not much concerned with international law.
Yeah.
So what we saw happen in some of the last flotillas is that there was a kind of sham tribunal that was established predominantly with the view to persecuting the activists. We also know that there's a racially disaggregated sense of violence. And so this is really, really important. I have been reading a fantastic book at the moment, and one of the points is about the history and the genealogy of the term terrorist. And one of the points that she makes is we think we can see and taste and feel what a terror attack is. But actually, the difference between a terror attack and a non-terror attack usually has to do with the race of the imagined boogeyman, and a lot less to do with the nature of the attack. So a drone attack on a civilian flotilla is a terror attack. And I want us to be very clear about that. This is a terrorist attack, and these people are survivors of terrorist attacks that have now been abducted. So in terms of what happens next, there were some discussions about the fact that the administration will be sluggish owing to the fact that it is Yom Kippur today. I mean, in my humble Jewish opinion, Yom Kippur has not intervened in the perpetration of a genocide. I do not see why it should intervene in a bureaucracy around political prisoners. So I think that's the first thing. I think that what we want to get to, and if I can speak in crisis mode for a second, is to avoid the worst case scenario. So what we're seeing globally is people out on the streets. We're seeing people saying that there's a call for a general strike in Italy. We're seeing people saying up the calls for sanctions, stop selling arms, stop, expel ambassadors. All of these things that people have been saying for a very long time are kind of coming to a crescendo where people are saying no more again. Is now, and to kind of scupper the structure of impunity. So it's a tough road ahead. I am quite concerned about the limited information that Abdallah lawyers have been provided with. This is itself a violation of the rights of detainees. So I think that's something to keep in mind, and as we do, as always, to keep in mind how what is happening with the people on the flotilla is a playing out of the kind of patterns and logics of Zionism and violence that have played out.
Okay, we seem to have lost Jo over there, but quite interestingly, what she is, of course, mentioning is just the importance of how the violation of international law has been committed by Israel. Okay, we seem to have Jo back with us. Jo, again, thank you so much for coming back to us. Jo, President Cyril Ramaphosa, the presidency, of course, releasing a statement saying that they are requesting that, of course, Mandla Mandela, Zuki Savana, Riaz Mullah be returned. We still don't know the status of Zahira Somar, Dr. Zahira Somar, Dr. Fatima Hendricks, and Carrie Shalva. It's a statement, right? But shouldn't governments be doing more given that we've just seen another violation of human rights?
I think it's a good question. Let me say, I think, I'm still here, yeah?
Yeah.
Sorry, yes. I think compared, certainly in my interaction with legal units from other delegations, working with other delegations and from other parts of the world, the kind of commitment we are seeing from the South African government to this process has been astronomically better than most other states. So let me be clear on that, on the flotilla. So I think, things like making sure that consular support services are propped up, multiple statements at every instance of aggression, a lot of support has been provided to the flotilla participants. So I think that's the one thing. I think that on the other hand, we do need to see not only ramped up efforts, we need to see an absolute refusal, not only to say the South Africans are not allowed, but if we are to embrace a spirit that says, we can imagine beyond a world beyond a border. We, as Palestine invites us to do, to remember that the border is colonial. We need to see all the abductees released, not just South African ones. And South Africa has shown itself to be internationalist in its solidarity. So pushing for the South Africans to be released, but in fact for all the prisoners to be released, is so important. That's the one thing. And on the other hand, we really do need to see a ramping up of what has been a remarkable commitment to the Palestinian struggle by the South African government to kind of come to the material concerns. So we are still seeing Glencore trading in South Africa. It is one of several conglomerates that has been listed by United Nations Special Rapporteur Francesca Albanese in her report around the economies of genocide and settler colonialism. We should not allow Glencore to be exploiting South African workers while also selling coal to fund the genocide grid. All of these things are really important steps, and our activists have consistently requested not only that we push for their release, but as we do, that we remember that the siege that they are breaking is part of a settler colonial structure, that we break that siege and that we break that settler colonial structure. States have the power to end this genocide, and they can and should do that now, and South Africa is included in that.
Joe, one final question. These threats from Itamar Ben-Gvir, I know I had asked you this question a couple of weeks ago. As the hostages are in these prisons at this very moment, how concerned should we all be if we are to take what he is saying very seriously? And I think we should be taking it very seriously, given who he represents within the Israeli government.
I think you're absolutely right. Let us be very, very clear. If we look at the Hind Rajab Foundation's report, communication around the massacre of media workers, and as Hilaal will know, I have immense admiration for the integrity of the media worker, the journalist, and I think one of the things they said is that all the journalists who have been targeted were originally smeared as terrorists. That then sets the ground for their being eliminated, assassinated, tortured, or detained, right? We also know that when Israel wanted to bomb a hospital, it referred to it as a cell of terrorist activity. A neonatal ward can be called a terrorist. Hey, anyone who stands up against genocide, or who is Palestinian, or who, I saw today, people who have refused to leave Gaza are being called terrorists. So it's a very dangerous rhetoric that effectively, illegally, preemptively sets the stage to justify violence. So we absolutely need to be vigilant. We need to put pressure on everyone. We need to be out on the streets. We need to be out on our pens, on our social medias, wherever we are. Our activism may be imperfect. We may never have been to a protest before, but this is the moment to escalate. Our Palestinian siblings are calling us to escalate.
Joe,
Sorry, yeah.
Joe, yeah, I have to stop. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. Always good having you on. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's Joe Bluen, who's a member of the legal support team for the Global Sumud Flotilla. That's all we have for you here on News in Focus. I'll see you again on Monday. From myself, for Hospital, and the rest of the team in Johannesburg. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.